I go to pains to edit out the student section if they ever appear. If the projector blow, right. Get their voices like. So you all sound like you sound like serial killers basically, calling into the police, yeah, right. Yeah. Okay. Super weird. There's that vent just sucks it. Look at that. Okay. Excellent placement. Can you see this okay? More light. Less light. Well, I guess it's still. Is that all right? Just lie back. Enjoy the trip. We'll be around shortly with some beverages. Okay, so. Which you have to pay for. And we only accept credit cards. All right. All right. All right. So we're going to figure this out. So let me see if this little guy's working. Good. Right. It's going to be from this paper, which has a whole bunch of other stuff in there about, generally about random networks, the whole generating function approach. Wilf is thanked in this paper, the generating functionology champion, Herb Wilf. So it's a beautiful sort of extension of combinatorics approaches to networks. All right, so here's an example, which I drew up the other day. So this point that there are two projections for each bipartite affiliation graph. So ABCD, ABCDE. And I showed you the one before for that particular example, but so Apple connects these three characters together, right? So we'll see asparagus, beetroot, and dandelion greens should be connected. So here they are, and that's because of Apple. So that triangle is Apple. So every set of links coming out of either direction creates a clique. So it's a clique generating kind of thing. So there'll be a little clique of three, which of course is a triangle for asparagus, beetroot, and cucumber. So asparagus and beetroot are already connected. So this, could be a double line, right? So we could do that, which you saw in the papers. Of course, you've got your nice little, my pencil didn't work as well, but it could be a double line. We put a count of 2 on it. So that's a triangle. So cantaloupe doesn't bring anything together. Right. So it doesn't induce any connections down here. And date connects eggplant and cucumber, so they should be connected. Right. And then, so this dashed line in here shows what would happen if we added dandelion greens to this group. So it would create a clique of 4 induced by banana for these 4. Banana. So it's banana. So let's see. So dandelion greens, if it wasn't connected to cucumber, beetroot, or asparagus, will be connected now. So it already was connected to these 2. So that extra dash line is for that guy. Okay. Coolness? Right, so it makes cliques. And so that should be a clique of 4. It is, right? So there's a 4. You can see that? There's a 4 clique there. Right. Fully connected group. So a clique is a fully connected, a clique of N is a fully connected subnetwork of size N. All right, so going this other way, just this one example, but just to really make it clear, there are these 2 directions. So apple is connected to banana and cantaloupe. Asparagus is going to do this. So it's going to connect apple and banana, right? So we get a link between them. Beetroot is going to connect apple and banana, so it's just another link. Cucumber is going to connect banana and date, so there's going to be that one. Dandelion greens is going to connect cantaloupe and apple, so we have that one across there. So these are thinner connections. So it's, going from one side to the other is not. It can be quite different. Right? There are at most 2 links coming into these guys. and eggplant connects to date. So again, it's just one link, it doesn't do anything. And if we add this dashed line here, so that's a connection again for dandelions. So dandelions is now going to create a clique of these three, A, B, C. So there it is. Now, the obvious thing, and so we'll have to put this into our calculations, is that there's some number of edges across here. M, let's call it M, some number of edges. So the number of, the sum of the degrees of these guys has to equal the sum of the degrees of this guy up here, right? Another way to encode that would be the average degree. So this is not their induced degree, right? So there's a degree in their fruit network and the degree in the vegetable network are there. You might think of them as their real degree, right? So these guys don't actually talk to each other. They just match, right? People don't talk to the boards they're on, the actual boards. So actors are in movies, but they communicate with other actors, say. Not always true, right? It can be that, one, it's a group of people here and a group of people here, so of course they are actual communications and there are communications here as well. But they could be very different things. Books and words, whatever it is. The words don't talk to the books. All right. So, make sense? Yeah? Fun thing to play with. So what we're going to do is say, all right, well, you could have a real one, which we've looked at a few examples. And I encourage you to go and look at those some more. Or we could certainly do this whole random network thing, which we've really done enough. We've exhausted it for the so-called unipartite version, right? You might call it unipart, but just a network where we're connecting up things. Now we go to this structure. Well, there's a whole gamut of randomness to play with here. So we'll keep ourselves under control. We want to figure out. Okay, so what we want to figure out is two things. So let's say this is extremely large networks, right? We want to figure out does this thing have a giant component here and here, and can they be separate, right? Can there be a giant component here and not one here? All right, so there's a question. Can you imagine a situation where you have this bipartite thing? It's huge, right? Bazillions here, bazillions here. You project up here, you project down, you induce these two networks. Is it possible to have, now I'm not thinking about random ones, we're thinking about arbitrary ones. Is it possible to have a giant component, so they're well connected here, some way, and poorly connected down here? Terrible of me to ask questions like this. Very rude. Apologize. So it will turn out it's not okay. Yeah, no. So it'll turn out for random ones, this doesn't happen. They appear at the same time. If we're tuning through a family, but you could imagine something like this, which is ridiculous. But all of these guys down here are just connected into one. So giant clique. Most of these guys are not connected to each other. I mean, in this extreme example, none of them are connected to each other. So ridiculous. So it's certainly possible. So in a real network, in a real bipartite affiliation thing, it may be that your movies aren't well connected for some reason, but your actors are, or the other way around. That's possible. Okay. All right. Okay. So font awesome. So let's take two kinds, and we'll use this language to understand it, right? So we have movies, stories, okay, and we'll have the tropes, so the themes or the motifs or the kind of the ideas in them. If you haven't been to the site, it's good fun. This is tvtropes.org, which is sort of an effort to systematically, write down the kinds of motifs you find in stories, storytelling in general, but particularly TV shows, I guess. I think they mostly, it's TV tropes. So it was started because of Buffy, actually. That's the claim, right? You mean making it or reading it? Yeah. Because it's very interesting. But stories were story things, right? So it's cool. But there, it goes from everything like the body swap type ones, which happens, whatever, right? The the capsule episode, which is what you guys are in now, right, where you're stuck in a room, which always happens, right, in a sitcom, like the 15th episode of the season. For some reason, they get trapped on a subway car, and something just plays out because of that, and it's fun, right? But it's also very cheap to make, which is really what's going on. Yeah. This week, we're in a box. Yeah. So, okay, so tropes, all right? So motifs, themes, whatever it is. So stories contain these tropes, right? So in the big story, the big ones are things like Rich Gets Richer, Kill the Monster, which is Beowulf, or really sort of a remarkably large number of stories and movies and books that involve that in some way. Journey type ones, or these are the big ones, and Journey and Return, Journey Where You Don't Come Back. Romance, comedy, these are sort of these big themes. Which, I have this story that they're all about life and death, basically. If you pull right up to the most abstract version of them. Doesn't mean that you talk about it in every story, but if you go right, Rags to Riches is certainly about survival in some sense. Kill the Monster is, obviously about that. It's getting back to sort of the same position, just this is a bad situation. Journey, often, those things are often about making things better in some way. All right. So stories have these tropes inside them. Something like Lord of the Rings has obviously Journey, has Kill the Monster, not so much the romance, though some people would suggest there is. But based on the movies, right? Yeah, right. But they can contain multiple tropes, right? And of course, yeah, right. And the trope, if you point to a particular trope, then you can light up all these stories that it's in. You can say, oh, it's this one, which is what the TV tropes does. So it's a bipartite affiliation. So, it may be that these two tropes always go together, right? Just like these two flavors always go together, whatever it is you're thinking about. Okay, good. So we have a story trope system. And so let's define a few things and then see how they have to, like the minimal restrictions on them, right? So we have some number of stories, which we'll do with this little guy here. And so light bulbs for ideas, I guess. So, and some number of tropes, okay? And then I'll just write as this. We won't use it too much. We just need to say that's true. So this is the number of edges, right? Just the total number of edges across our thing. So this could be whatever, bananas and whatever. Fruit and vegetables, boards and directors. So it's the number of links total. And we need some underlying degree distributions. So hopefully this will all hold together. And so we'll have the story one and the trope one. We need this to happen. Okay, let's think about that. So the average number of affiliations so the average number of tropes per story, the average number of stories per trope, we'll compute those things. And then we must have simply that this works, right? So the number of stories times the average number of tropes per story will give you the number of edges coming out, the total number of edges pointing down to the tropes, and pointing back up to the stories has to be the number of tropes multiplied by the average number of stories they're involved in. So that's really the only balance. Okay, so that provides a restriction. You can have a degree distributions, but as we've done sometimes, you could just have an explicit frequency distribution. It's not probabilistic. You just have, there are going to be 30 that have degree 1, 40 that have degree 2. You can just actually, say it, and then randomly connect them up. Or you could sample from a distribution such that this probabilistically works. Right, so in making it, you could actually manifestly have the number of links coming down sum up to be the number of links coming up, because you've said explicitly what the frequency distribution is. But it could be probabilistic. So you're sampling, you're saying, okay, the first story has 13 tropes, and I'm going to choose, and I get 3 for the next one. You line them all up, and then you line up all the number of stories coming out of the tropes. They might not balance, right? So then you have to tweak a little bit. Fair enough, you tweak a little bit, and then you get it to work. So it depends if you're, how you're building it. But you must have this balance, right? But otherwise the thing. So to start with then, you've got, all right, your tropes up here. So they'll be just these little, like we did for random networks in general, these little stub kind of things. if you were building it. Okay. And you could worry about, making sure everything was nicely connected. But then you just start linking them up. And it's got to be one connection between each one and so on. Right? Okay. So if it's big enough, you should be able to do it. I really have one figure to show you. There are more to come later on if I build on this, but I have one to show you that will interesting to reflect on, given the distribution of degree here, the distribution of degree here, and then what's the induced degree distribution for these guys as they are connected to each other. Right. So once again, what we're trying to get to is there's just this network, right? We don't see these edges in here, but we're going to induce them and then figure out what's going on with those networks. And the simplest thing is to say, well, what's the degree distribution? What's the average degree? What's the what's the distribution of component sizes, right? So these sorts of things we've asked for random networks. We can do the same, which is pretty cool. I mean, super cool. Okay. So usual kind of things that we do. We okay? There are two there? There are three in them. Yeah. Redundancy. Yeah. Yeah. Sugru is the is an ad for Sugru right there. It's this funny little rubber glue stuff you can, and it dries and it's still a little bit bendy. Pretty good. Yeah, I need to pile a whole bunch on that one. Actually, it should be pretty easy to do that. Yeah. I could have like 3 of them. Well, because they fail. Yeah. Anyway, well, I fail, let's be honest. It's not, I'm sorry, Steve Jobs. Okay. What have I said? Okay, so we're going to randomly select an edge, because we'll grab one of these edges. We've made this thing. Whoop. Jump on this edge, and we can look up at our stories and our tropes down here. So we look this way and we look this way, and we're going to see, so the key thing is we'll see, okay, so this is going to have connections going back up here. And then say we look up at this one, that's also going to start pointing down in this direction. Right, this story has a bunch of tropes. So there's this kind of, if we want to see how this thing, if we want to see how these tropes are connected, or say these stories are connected to each other, well, we have to go to every trope and then look up at every story. And that becomes the neighborhood of this first guy. And the spreading, if you like, or the giant component will be more to do, though, with, you look at this, so you're looking down through here, so you're going from a story to a trope. That brings up all these other stories. And then you look at how many tropes that brings up again, right? So like how many edges that begets. All right, we'll come to it. Let's just keep it under control to start with. All right, so we're going to pick one of these edges, right? So this edge here. So here's the probability that the story, so we're going to run along here, contains k other tropes, right? That's being pointed to by k other tropes, or connected to k other tropes, right? And we want the same here. What's the probability that this trope is part of k other stories? So it looks like RK that we had before. All right, so it's the same kind of thing. So it's so this is, yeah. So we're going up towards the stories. This is probably the story has k other tropes associated with it. So it's you're selecting from the stories. There are k plus 1 ways to get to it, and this is the one that will have k others, right? Okay, so you get this probability for normalized probability for choosing it. Look at this thing on the bottom. It's really just the average number of tropes in a story. It's the same kind of thing as what we had before. Just this would be average degree. This would be this guy. If it was just a regular random network. The picture is exactly the same, which so it's a mirror story, right? Okay, so this is the probability that a trope is part of k other stories, right? We're starting in a story, if you like. We're going and we find a trope. You can think of it somewhat like that. We find the trope, and then we see what's the probability that it's part of k other stories. So k plus 1. What's the probability that we connected to that guy? It's k plus 1, pk plus 1. That's how many ways we can get to it. Randomly wiring up. That's the story. Proper normalization. This thing stays the same on the top, and we see this and we see this. If we just shift this index, it's the average degree. Right, started at should start at j equals 0. Yeah. Right. Not bad. Yeah. So this should be j equals 0 and j equals 0. Right. See how many mistakes I made. All right. Okay. Crazy. So, okay, we're going to need that. We're going to need that guy. Okay. Because we're going to surf around on this bipartite affiliation graph. Okay, now we want this is what we want to get to, the induced degree distribution. And everything associated with it. In principle, the induced cluster size distribution. Nasty thing, right? We'd find the generating function before, at least an equation which has the generating function in it. We'd like to get to that too, but let's just do the degree distributions to start with. So, okay. So this is we look at the induced network up here, and so this is probably that a randomly chosen story in that network has k other stories connected to it, and they're connected if they have at least one trope in common. Trying to think about, so you have to think about what's the possibility of having more than one and so on. You know, the larger it gets, it should go to 0. Yeah, right. Okay. Oh, right. So, and the inverse of that, or the opposite of that, is so we're going to choose a random trope in this projected or induced network. So what's probably that? I'll put this little in here. What's probably that's connected to k other tropes in that network. All right, and it has to co-occur. That happens when they co-occur in stories. The connection is manifested. All right, good. Okay. Yeah. Right. So this is kill the monster. What's probably the kill the monster has, you know, has k other tropes associated with it. Okay. So there'll be this same kind of story, but now we're in these induced networks. It's not quite in the Okay, so this is not quite in the network. This is slightly different. Yeah. So it's a probability that you so it's a probability that you run along one of the edges from the bipartite affiliation one. I may have to tweak that definition because this just to connect, you know, given what we've said in the past. Right, there's a network that lifts out of here, which has its own pk, right? P induced k, whatever it is, stories. Okay, but this is actually okay. So I'm going to run along this edge here. What's the probability that the thing that the story I end at? Is connected to k other stories. Is that right? No, it should be the standard one. It's what we want. It's the standard one. No, which story is which? Right. Yeah. So they're categorized by their degree. Right. Right. Okay. Same thing for the yep. So we have an edge leading to a trope. What's probably that is connected to k other tropes. Right. So we're going to find these distributions. You know, if we can get the component sizes, right, test for the presence of a giant component, we want to do that kind of thing we did before. If you found the average component size, for example, you should see it go to infinity. And, right, minimize weeping. We're good. We'll see how we go. Okay. Unrelated, completely unrelated. Okay, let's see how we go. All right, generating functions. Yes. Absolutely. We're doing this, yes. Well, pure mathematics. Yeah. The combinatorics rule, yeah. All right. Okay, so we can just make these guys up. Right. Boom, we'll just hang our probabilities on powers of x. Why not? It's all good because we're talking about probabilities of integers and so on, so this all works out. Okay, so we're going to have all of these little beasts. So this is for, it's the underlying degree distribution that we're giving these guys to start with. Okay, everything looks the same as before. And the connection between probability that a story has degree k and the probability that a story that you end at after following a link has k has k other tropes associated with it. It's the same it's the same picture, right? It's the derivative of this generating function divided by the normalized population. Yeah, right. So the derivative brings the k down, kpk, makes it xk minus 1. We shift it back up. We get k plus 1, pk plus 1. We have to normalize it. Okay? So when x equals 1, this is the same thing. These guys are the same, so it's 1. All right? Okay, that's part of what I just said. So we need these things. Well, there's this. It also implies, of course, that fr is equal to 1. Fr of 1 is 1. So we have this with this. So it's normalization, just means probably sum to 1. Right. And it doesn't mean it means this. The averages are given by the first derivative value at 1. Usual things, right? Okay? Yeah? Okay. So we'll get a very cool little result at the end, right, as to whether there's a giant component, right? It's just a very nice, efficient little statement. It will connect the things you've seen before. We have to go through madness. Okay. So, all right. So we're going to put these guys in as well. So again, fine. We have a probability distribution defined on the integers, 0. No problem. Let's just make a generating function for it. So we can get to these guys. We're good. From there, we could hopefully compute averages at least. Right? We might not be able to get the whole thing. Okay. So we have these two, and then we have the. They are the right answer. So we have this the generating function for the probability that a node in either of these networks, when reached upon an edge, has k other friends. Okay, good. So these are the crucial ones for figuring out if they're spreading in general or if there's a giant component. Right? They're about. So what we're really after eventually will be, is the first derivative of this thing evaluated at 1 greater than 1? So it's what's the average number of other friends. So you jump on a random edge in this network, the induced one here or the induced one here, jump on a random edge, you run along, you hit a node. What's the average number of other friends it has? If it's greater than 1, you have a giant component. Cool. All right. Okay. So it's this stuff we've been doing over and over, and it's pretty weird. So it's sums of randomly chosen numbers, right, from some random variables, where we've chosen, we randomly choose the number of times we choose the second. Such goodness. It'd be fun. It's an easy little thing to code up, right, actually. You mess around with this. It's an easy little thing to code up, right? I mean, imagine you've got your 20-sided die, which none of you have from when you were kids. You roll it. You get 17, magically, and then you pull out your 8-sided die and you roll that 17 times. You get a number, right? You add that up, you get a number. You do it again. Maybe you get a 3 this time. So you roll the other one 3 times, you add it up, get a number. And then eventually you fill in this thing, right? And the maximum it could be is 20 times 8. 160, right? Minimum, you've got to have at least one, so minimum would be 1. Right? Only one roll, and you get a 1. So you get some distribution on 1 to 160, and it's, yeah, it turns out the generating function for that nastiness will be the composition of generating functions, right? So we drive that in a couple of ways. It's a funny beast. I mean, it's an elegant result. This is, you know, composition of two functions. Great. But well, nuts. Okay, all right, so that's going to help. Yeah, because it's the sort of thing where we're going to select this guy. It's going to have some degree, and then we want to add up the number of tropes, right? So if it's got, you know, 18 other tropes it's associated with, then we have to roll the special trope die 18 times and add that up, right? So we'll be doing this. We'll say, okay, let's roll the special die that gives us the number of other tropes that a story has, and then for each trope, we roll the special thing that tells you how many stories it's part of, and add them up. So here's an example of the kind of somewhat unintuitive kind of mess that you can get out of it. It's not a disaster, but it's not really obvious at all a priori what these distributions might look like. I don't think so. So this is, you think of this was written in terms of actors and movies. So it says number of co-stars Z. So let's think of it as probably a story is connected to k other stories. Right? So it's the degree distribution, the induced degree distribution, because they share a trope, at least one trope. It's pure. There's a yeah. So there's a simulation and then a theoretical computation here. They are the same. It's sort of very humorous sort of thing you can do. This is Newman's work. So okay, so here are the parameters. So there are 10,000 films in this one, 100,000 tropes, right? So the average number of tropes per film is 1.5. The average number of movies that a trope is in, or stories, is 15. So these things match. 1.5 times 10 to the 4. That's the number of edges coming down. 15, no, sorry. Yeah, these need to be switched, right? Yep. 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 Right, so completely wrong. So the number of movies is 10 to the 4. It has to have 15 tropes per movie. Right, good. And then, yeah, and then 1.5 movies per trope. Yeah, I changed the notation completely, obviously. And yeah, tricky. All right, so then this is, got this right, this is, you think of this as the number of stories that a story is connected to, or that distribution. Right, and you end up with this 2 humps. And underlying this, right, it's just this. There's nothing. If you think about what's going on here, all we've specified is, so you can do this 2 ways. One is you say, oh, it is a plus-on distribution, actually. Or you could just throw these links down, right? So there are 15,000 links. You've got 10,000 guys here, 100,000 guys here. You just throw all those links down. That's all. So the degree distribution at either end is fine, right? So the underlying degree distribution for this guy, there's nothing special about that, right? You're actually just allocating these things. Should be plus on. Okay, that's what's happening here and here. But then when you say, okay, let's go like this, we'll follow all of these things, and we'll make a new network based on who's connected to whom through this second layer. Then you get this. So a bit strange, right? Okay, so this is, so it turns out, yeah. The peaks? Yeah, so they must be, I haven't thought about this properly. Oh, it should be, we should be able to see it as some sort of a, all right, well, this is a thing to add later on because we're going to go through the calculation. You should be able to see how those 2 distributions, these Poissons, get smushed together. The smushing, I think, is what's going on. Plus on smushing. Putting fish together, right? Okay. Okay, yeah, that would be good to get some intuition for that one, yes. Okay, first time around with the new slides. Okay, so let's see. So let's see if we can get this. So here's the this is very nice. We have pretty, we have things we've been using before. These generating functions are fine. Well, they're nasty, I know, but we have a generating function for this distribution and their friends, other friends distribution. Right, P and R. Okay, we have those guys. All right, so turns out they're not, the connection to the induced one is quite clean. Okay, so let's see. So we're going to randomly choose a story, find all of its tropes, right? So it's got all these tropes. And that is U, right? And W equals the sum from 1 to U of V. That's U. That's the number of, so this is the number of tropes. We're randomly choosing a story. It has some number of tropes. And for each one of those tropes, we say, okay, let's sample from this distribution down here of how many stories that's part of. So this is your 20-sided die up here, right? You roll your 20-sided die and you get some number. That's how many tropes you're part of, how many tropes are in this story. And then you go and find, you find them, right? Random connection. This is random story writing, obviously. And you find your tropes. And for each one, you roll an 8-sided die and you get some number of stories it's connected to. And because it's all random, they won't be the same story, right? So that means this guy is connected to some sum of 8-sided die being realized. And, and then we're looking at all possible stories we could start with. So that's the composition of generating functions. So the generating function for the degrees of these guys up here is formed by the generating function for the number of stories a trope is part of. That's probably that a trope, this guy with an R sub k, is probably that a trope is part of k stories. That's your 8-sided die. And then this is, so that's the V, and this is the U part. This is the number of tropes that a randomly chosen story is part of. Right. I mean, it's slightly disturbing. This was a slightly disturbing proof, I realize. Right? But okay. But if we, this goes to this, hopefully you can, if you, let's say you just believe this, then hopefully this is sensible given that result. Right? This is the number of times you're going to sample the story. That's how many tropes are in a story, that P. So you sample from that distribution, you get so many stories, so many tropes, and then for each one you sample that trope and you get the number of stories it points to. And it's an R because we're ignoring this guy, right? So here's your story. It points to all of these tropes, and you want to see how many other tropes it points to. You don't want to count this guy. You're not counting yourself. Right? You could do it. You just then have to figure out how to I mean, mechanically, you could do that if you want to do it mathematically. You'd always have to include a little thing that subtracted off the degree of the guy you started with. But this, it's much more convenient to do this where you say, okay, let's look at how many other stories it's in. This trope is part of. And sum that variable. How are we doing? Yeah.
I did accept that last little part. How do you not recounting that sort of
Oh, then you're not counting yourself? Yeah, so that's so that's good. So we would be doing that if this was a P. Because P is probably right. Okay. This is explicitly saying the R is, the construction of R is, okay, we start with P, that's the first thing you're given. We've given a P probability distribution for here and a probability distribution for here, and you construct the R ones, which give you, so I'm going to run down here and find how many other edges come out of here. That's R. Right. Which is k plus 1 times pk plus 1 normalized. Is that okay? Okay. So that's important. That's a little difference there. This one, you know, we're not on edge. We're just starting at a story. So we just go boom like this. We'll tweak it just a little bit in this next piece. Okay, so imagine, so instead of starting at a story, we're running up here. We're running along an edge, and we're getting to a story, like that. So we're going to sort of just pull it back one step, and we need to do this because this is how we, right? Edge-to-edge transitions are always the thing that you figure where we solve everything. So we're going to choose an edge. We find the story at the end of that edge, and then find its tropes. So again, that's going to be this U part of V equals the sum of I equals 1 to U of, W equals the sum of I equals 1 to U of V. So we're going to go up here. We find this guy. It has K. We're looking for K other stories, K other tropes. And then we get, for each trope, we get K other stories again. So the internal part stays the same. This variable that we're interested in here is, right, we're going to go up here, but we don't want to come back down. We're going to go up here, and then we're going to go down all of these guys, and we're interested in how many other stories are at the end of this, are associated with this trope. But we got to our first story by following a random edge. So we're not going to count this one. Yeah, so we get to this guy. We select stories with more tropes disproportionately. They're easy to get to. Right, the K plus 1, or the, you know, there's a growth factor of K. So we tend to do that. So if we're just surfing around in this thing, we tend to get to guys that have more tropes in them. We tend to get to tropes that have more stories in them, or associated with more stories. It's part of it, so it's built into this madness. So this changes. So now we're finding we're finding R for the induced network of stories. Just in the traditional way, in the standard way we've tried to understand what R is, or define what R is. So it's here to us. Right, we want to be behaving like this. Here's a story. How many other stories is this one attached to? So the first line gives us, we started a story. How many other stories is it attached to? Right, standard P of K. So this is, right, this is a P and this is an R situation. We're running along an edge. We hit a story. How many other stories are there? So the tweak is just to change from here to here. So it's you're essentially changing that random variable that is U, and the W equals the sum U V, right? But you're still choosing the thing that you're then sampling from is still the same, right? So either you start here and then sample from all these guys, or you run along an edge and still sample from them in the same kind of way. Okay. Brain food. All right. If it was real Vermont, right, we'd have a moose on a spit in the middle. Probably a squirrel, right, to be honest. Try to catch a moose, we get squirrels. Okay. All right, and then tell the kids it's a moose. All right, maple syrup, that's what we do. Okay, so this is really nice. I mean, it's crazy, but look, this is pretty good. The induced one, just these two guys. But this is, they're being combined in a fun way, fun people, right? Again, right, so the one for story, so you'd flip them, and that's on the next thing. So this is just a flip of everything. If we look at the tropes, we want to find so we're looking at the tropes down here. They have some degree distribution. The generating function for that guy is built out of, get it right? Yeah. So you're choosing from the tropes, right? So what's the number of stories they're involved with? And then for each story, what's the number of other tropes they're involved with? So you go from trope to story to trope. And it's really trope to many stories and then to many tropes. And you add up all those guys. Pretty groovy. And then the opposite, the same story again here, right? So now we're running along an edge, we run into a trope, right? So we kind of just move it back one step, right? We run along an edge, we hit a trope, and then we bounce out of that thing back to all the stories, and then back down to all the tropes that they're connected to, and add those guys up. Because we really want this guy, this R thing. It's just the best. It's great. Right? Okay. Okay? Not okay. All right. So now we're swallowing this story. So let's see if we can get some results out of it. So, oh, it has a mouse. Wow. Can only do. Oh, I feel like a dog. Or a cat. Except I'm controlling my own laser pointer. All right. Damn it. That's true. I guess you could attach a laser pointer to a cat. Wow. It's like the carrot on the donkey. You know? Yeah. All right. See you later. See you later, Whiskers. Cat's had a great day. Okay. All right. Okay. So now we have an expression, right? And it's in terms of all of these things are in terms of really just the underlying degree distribution for the stories and the degree distribution for the tropes. That's all we're given, really. And they have to balance, but that's all we're given. From those, we create the R distributions for both of them, right? They're built out of those. And then we get the induced ones. And so we can now compute the average degree of the induced distribution for stories. It's the standard kind of thing. If you have the generating function for that distribution, take its derivative and set x equal to 1. Right? And we have because we have this expression for it in terms of these other guys, we can do this. Right? So let's see if we can do this. So this average number of stories that a story is connected to. So we take this derivative, and I'm putting in the expression we just found. Right? So the induced probability distribution's generating function is this composition of the underlying degree distribution for stories and the, I need a good word for that, I guess, but the other friends distribution for tropes. Okay, so chain rule, it was worth it. Calculus was worth it. It's 1 point. Okay, so let's take our derivative and we'll set x equals 1. So this guy's going to come out the front with a derivative, x equals 1. We're going to take a derivative of this guy and leave this business the same inside. Yeah. So it's that, x equals 1. This is a nice function. This is a nice probability distribution. So when it's evaluated at 1, it is 1. Okay, so that's 1. So that's pretty groovy, right? There's an asymmetry, right? Because there's an R here and a P here. But it has stories and tropes involved. But for tropes, it's about the other friends distribution. For this guy, it's about just randomly selecting a node. Okay, cool. Yeah. That's interesting. Huh. Yeah, so it has to match the other one, right? So we should think about that a little bit. I haven't really said much more about that here, but that should, yeah. Okay, match. I think it's in the slides. Let's think about this. Right, so we can do the same thing. It's just going to be a switch, right? So the average number of tropes the trope is connected to. Boom. We have R for stories here and P of tropes here. Right? The flip of these guys. So, well, we have to multiply by the number of, right? So you have to multiply this by the number of, providing that's really true. So the number of tropes and the number of stories, and then they should match up. Okay, so I'm going to put in the, so these are just in terms of the underlying thing. I'll put in the stuff we actually know, right? So we know what this derivative is. We know that this thing is by itself fp prime over fp1. So we take another derivative, we get fp double prime, which is bringing a k down and then a k minus 1 down. So it's an average of kk minus 1. We have the average of k on the bottom for tropes. That's multiplied by the average degree for stories. All right, I'm going to have to look at this and make sure that's all cool. But the lies I told you at the start is that the no, sorry. It's my fault. No, these are just different things, right? These are just different things. There are constraints on, good. So there, this is just what the average degree is for this thing. It's what the average degree is for this thing. There are some constraints, of course, on the underlying distributions, just in the fact that the average degrees multiplied by their numbers have to match. And that's it. Okay, that's cool. Totally cool. So you can see there's an asymmetry. Yeah. Now, this is really the gain ratio. Right? This thing here is really the gain ratio. That's essentially been our condition all along for whether there's a giant component or not, whether this thing is greater than 1. Right? Because it's the average number of other friends hit a node. What's the average number of other friends? If that's greater than 1, then there's a giant component. So you could think of this as a kind of a gain ratio here multiplying that average degree, a gain ratio multiplying the average degree. The gain ratio comes from the other side. So that should make sense, right? So this guy has some average number of tropes. If you take an average guy here, so I'll put this in as intuition. Take an average member here. They have some average number of tropes. Each trope gets a gain in stories, which is this factor here. So then that gives you the average number of stories that it's connected to. Right? So it has 13 tropes. Each trope gets a gain factor of 3 going back up the other way. So on average, you have 39 stories you're connected to. Believable? Okay. All right, so the connection thing, really 2 more slides. We're good. So it's always about edges, right? So we've had, we do have to start at nodes now and then. I mean, that's still a question. But we profit from starting with an edge and looking at what that connects to. Okay, so we're running around here. What's the expected number of other, we're running along one of these edges. What's the expected number of other edges on the other side? Hit a story in the induced network up here. In the induced trope network, same thing. Running along a random edge in here, you hit a trope. What's the expected number of other tropes? Yeah. Okay. Okay. So again, it's a okay. So lots of indices now, right? So this is going to be. So before we just had this guy. Now we want this. This just means we're looking at the R distribution for the induced guy for stories. So it's the generating function for the induced network for stories. Take the first derivative. Set it to 1, that will give you this mean. Right? And we need this guy for the trope one. Okay, cool. Okay, excellent. All right, so we have this little beastie from before. We're just going to take its derivative set x equal to 1. And it was the one that has the 2 r's. So it's the same kind of structure that we had before. It's a chain rule. This derivative comes out the front here. And this derivative is, we have this derivative of this guy, and we leave the contents the same. Set x equal to 1. The same thing happens again. This goes to 1. And so we get a similar looking thing, except now there's a symmetry, right? So this is R and R. It should feel better that this is symmetric, actually, right? Because it's random. It shouldn't matter if you go from one side to the other, because now we're pinging. We could do this. We could come down a random edge, go back up, and then down like that. Or we could go up a random edge, go down and come back up. Those things should be kind of the same, right? In the first case, we're saying let's find out how many friends this guy has on average. Let's find out how many friends this guy has on average. Now we're saying how many new edges does this one get? And it should balance. It should feel like it should balance, because otherwise you're getting some sort of edge growth, which is cool. I mean, yes, edges are growing, but all right. So symmetry is cool. Happiness is cool. Okay, so that's really good. So it doesn't matter. So we can see that if we did it the other way, we get the same thing. And we know what these guys are in terms of their underlying degree distributions for these two beasts. Yeah. Okay. So it's the first derivative of the generating function for R, right, for each one. So that's the second derivative of the generating function for P divided by the first derivative, all evaluated at 1. So we get a kk minus 1 and a k. So these are the means here and the means of these guys. So this is not bad. These are really, okay. So what I was saying before, we get a giant component in both of them because they're the same, it's symmetric, if they're greater than 1. Right? Expected number of other friends that you're randomly running around here, running along an edge. What's the average number of other friends this node has? Here or here, same thing. So, and it's a product of two gain ratios. This is exactly the separate condition we would have had if they were just separate networks. They were just separate networks, separate proper kind of normal mixing network. So that should feel kind of okay too, right? You get a gain. There's a gain from going up here and then a gain from going down there. And if that product, right? So you might actually have you might have a gain that's less than 1 going in one direction, as long as the other one is big enough. Right? It might be a bit slender going up in one direction, but if the other one balances it out, you're good. So it is a product of two pieces. Physics. Hashtags. Actually, so you can take this horrible thing and mess around with it. You can say, well, let it equal 1. Let's let it equal 1. We'll put these two averages over on this side. And then we'll think about this, and we should make this k prime and k prime so we don't get other things confused. And we can look at this and play around with these averages. If you mess around with it a little bit, you can get to this form, which is actually the result in Newman in the paper. Right? So it's kind of nice, right? Because you've got your two distributions just sitting here. You've got a bunch of k's floating around. A sort of, but what does this mean? I mean, it's okay. It's fine. It's what happens when you do an analysis that is completely correct. It's like, the way they approach it is, when does the average component size explode? Right. So when that's infinite, when that goes to infinity, you're at the critical point. So this is the result that comes out. And of course, there's no good. It's just mathematical at that point, right? So you end up having to just kind of rearrange things to make it work. This actually has a physical story to it. Gain ratio times gain ratio is greater than 1. Right? That's a classic system story. boom, 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 it builds. So this is, you don't want to take this away. This also loses the greater than or equal to or whatever it is. Like we don't know which side is the explosive side. Here it's clear. Anyway, so that's, okay. A little excited about the hashtag. This is the same as this, yeah? When we've set it, the condition is greater than 1. If we set it equal to 1 to find the point exactly, then mess with it. Well, when we set it equal to 1, you can see we can put this guy up here. I'll do it. Okay, so so we've got P, K, and I don't want to use all my little, so I'll do this guy and a light bulb. So there's PK and it's K minus 1. Right, we've got that. And then we've got the sum of PK, light bulb. Let's make it prime. I can actually watch that movie repeatedly. It's sort of a therapeutic device while I'm working. It's good. Okay, so I'm going to do this and then pull. So and this equaled 1, right? We're going to set it equal to 1, and then this stuff was on the bottom. So let's set it equal to 1, and we'll put that over here. So it's a sum PK movies just K, and then the sum. I'll make it so this is K and this is K prime, PK prime, K, and this is light bulb. Okay, cool. So we're going to pull this sum out here, and this sum out here. Just pull it through, rearrange some stuff. So now we're going to have, let me keep it here. So we've got sum from K equals 0 to infinity PK. This guy, PK, you know why you don't use those fonts, right? Glyphs. This guy, we should, right? So these guys are here. I'm going to make that a K prime, K equals 0 to infinity, right? So we pulled this out. These guys are here, so this is going to be, there's a K minus 1. I'm going to put a K prime for that guy, and then a K prime minus 1. That's all of this, and then subtract off that, K prime. All of this equals 0. I pulled this over to here, so we get a K and a K prime. And okay. So this bit, you can see that these things are the same, right? So K prime, and I'm going to expand this bit, so it's K prime, minus K prime, plus 1, and then there's a minus 1 for this guy. So these two cancel, and then this is this beast down here. Math, right? Right? But there was a physical intuition, which is, this is all good. Everyone's a good person. No one's a bad person. It's a fantastic paper. You've left, and this is nice and tidy. Something equals 0. Interesting though that it's a bit messy to test for zeros a little bit. Obviously you can just add 1, but right, things like determinant equals 0. It's a little bit. We had that for a previous example, right? For another contagion thing on associative networks, but a little nasty. This is a better, more robust kind of thing. If you have the system, you can run it a few times and see if it takes off. This other one is a little sneaky to test. Anyway, so that's that's just to connect it back to the paper. Yep. But this is a really kind of a groovy result, actually, right? So in fact, someone gives you the degree distributions for the stories and the tropes, and you compute these quantities, and you've got whether right. So it's a nice little test, and it's intuitive. So that's a cool thing. Of course, you can use generating functions to find out the component size distribution, and then you can find the average component size and later on those things. It's very similar to, I mean, really follows the same lines as what we've done for regular random networks. That's part of this game here. You could spread things on this. We talked, okay, so we did talk about interconnected networks, but that's a different game, a very important other kind of spreading. But you know, the spreading in here is important, right? So CEO pay, right? Put this guy on the other board, or you know, like anything, like little kids who want candy. But my friends, I mean, I literally heard this the other day. I mean, I heard this the other day. You know, the 9-year-old comes in and says, "Can I get Snapchat? Can I have Snapchat?" I'm like, "No," and that is something that Mummy and Daddy would have to talk about. And then I hear trot, 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 because we have a friend, right? Over. And then there's a discussion, and the friend says, but A has it, and B has it, and C, and it was like every sentence was the same. C has Snapchat, and D has Snapchat. And you can just feel the social pressure just crushing my team member. But it's that, you know, there's the, you know, owning objects and the people involved and that kind of, yeah. But yeah, so lots of things where it's contained, but there's a pressure felt through the system because people are sharing or whatever it is, you know, robots. They're, you know, experiencing things in different contexts and then bring them across, which is, you know, a good thing, right? Of course, we learn and share and so on. And there's a lot to be said for having a degree of balkanization, right? So you can have innovation. Unfortunately, it's innovation in making money by giving yourself pay raises. That's not the best. But you know, it could, whatever. These are school boards or something, and people move community. That's a slower thing, but they can take knowledge with them. Anyway, so there's a very important kind of spreading that's possible in all of these things. Tropes and stories. I mean, I don't know, but they certainly, you know, they spread. I mean, they're repeated, and at some point, people say, no, like we're not going to have quicksand in our movies anymore. It's done, right? And there's been a nice piece about that recently. I'm sure we must have, yeah, repeater. But 60s or 70s, 50s, there was just quicksand and everything. You walk down Manhattan, quicksand. You know, just some in Central Park because quicksand, you know. And eventually it's like, nah, maybe we're not going to do any more quicksand. I've seen a lot of that. Well, we'll get, you know, falling in, whatever it is, falling black holes, time travel, you know, yeah. There are these things that kind of run their extent. There are some we can't help, we just keep coming back to because they really are important. But there are sort of smaller, more specific ones. It's like word echoes, right? Using the same word over and over again. We're going to use the word "the" a bazillion times because we've got to do it. But you know, if you say, you know, contribution 4 times in a paragraph, it just sounds ridiculous. It's weird. So there's that sort of strange thing of things in the middle where, okay, we can't do it anymore. We'll say that we'll do the same thing. We'll just call it something else. Anyway, I think a really nice little calculation, actually. So now you know about random bipartite networks, and you know, again, very practical, real things. You may have to play around with them. Well, you should.